Safe Sex, Lies, and Videotapes, the shocking story of how the right is trying to destroy Planned Parenthood. Actually quite serious. And many of you may remember the old film, Sex, Lies, and Videotapes. Our presenter tonight is the Honorable Lynn Riddle. Judge Riddle is a retired federal judge having served 14 years as a United States bankruptcy judge in the Santa Ana Division of the Central District of California. Currently, she is a lecturer in reproductive justice at the University of California Irvine School of Law, as well as a distinguished senior fellow at the Center of Biotechnology and Global Health Policy. Since 2014, she works with and has served on the board of Planned Parenthood of Orange and San Bernardino counties. Judge Riddle earned her JD from the University of California Hastings School of Law and her EDD from Syracuse University. She was also a postdoctoral scholar in the Department of Philosophy at the University of California, Santa Barbara. Please welcome the Honorable Lynn Riddle.
Thank you so very much for having me, and I thank Barbara for finding me and inviting me. I have given you some materials that are out there on your table. How many of you have been a school teacher at some point, been a teacher of some sort? All right, I'm glad to see that. So one of the things I'm going to ask you to do is get your pen out and get your readers out. I've spent quite a bit of time putting together some material for you. I don't use the sort of slides to make presentations because I want you to be able to take material home. This is, in my view, very important material in my life, and I hope it will be important to you, and therefore it's here for you to take, and hopefully you'll be able to take some notes and therefore be able to refresh your recollection. So, as you can see, I'm going to talk a little bit tonight about how the right actually attempts, but hasn't yet and will not, destroy Planned Parenthood. Some of these, they have various kinds of actions that they take, the right I'm speaking of, and tactics. And more recently, I think, they are tending to use the politics of hate. But before I start, and referring you then to the front page of the handout that I've given you, I want to do a little bit of history here.
We can't hear you well enough, Lynn. I wonder if we can take that off
I think if I do it this way, it may be better. And I'm very sorry if you didn't hear me.
That's better. You adjusted.
All right.
Thank you, Lynn.
We okay now? All right. Thank you so much. A little bit of history here to put this march towards women's ability to make decisions about her own life choices. Remember that we are members of Homo sapiens, and that our species began sometime, I'm not an expert on this, but the experts say 300,000 to 400,000 years ago. And so if you just imagine that for 300,000 or 400,000 years, there were male and female Homo sapiens, and that the women, the female Homo sapiens from the time probably of 12 or 13, spent their entire lifetime of the 20 or 30 years that they lived being pregnant, nursing 1 or 2 children, having morning sickness, taking care of all the other little children that were around. Her entire life was out of her control and controlled by her reproduction, which was constant. And it wasn't until about 1850 that when Charles Goodyear learned how to and taught the world how to vulcanize rubber, that we first had the first sort of mass-produced male contraceptives, the condoms. They weren't very good at the time, but nonetheless, that was the first time probably that many people that condoms were available to men to control their paternity. But it wasn't until about the 1960s when medicine had evolved to the point where there were medications that women could take, and women could get the prescription if she had a doctor, and if she had access to a pharmacy, she could get a prescription so that she could begin to control her own reproductive capacity. So just putting this into perspective, the role of women and the ways in which we have viewed women going back 400,000 years to coming up just to 1960, this is a revolution. And we're in it. We're in the middle of it right now. And so I put for you on your little handout here this first little graphic where there is a woman there probably in the mid-1800s in her long skirt, and there is the stork, and she's trying to keep it at bay. Down at the bottom there, I put a picture that's somewhat recent. This is from May the 2nd of 2017, taken in the Rose Garden at the White House. And this was a celebration, which very rarely would happen, for the passage of a bill by the House of Representatives. And the bill that was passed was the American Health Care Act. That's important. It was about an 80-page act. I actually looked at it. And starting at page 2, among the definitions, there was that's where they began to talk about prohibited providers. That is, those entities in the United States that would be prohibited from providing health care. And only one agency or entity in the United States of America was actually captured by that definition, and it was Planned Parenthood. So out of an 80-page bill, the first thing that this group of our legislators wanted to do was to cut Planned Parenthood from providing health care to women. And I didn't edit this picture. This was just widely circulated, and you can see who voted and who's really jolly about the attempt to replace and repeal Obamacare and replace it with this vile act. Just over a month ago, Cecile Richards, who is presently the chief executive officer of Planned Parenthood, announced that she's going to be stepping down as the CEO. You may remember seeing Cecile Richards at some point in your time, but in recent history. But recently she appeared before a committee in the House of Representatives. She was questioned by this very largely conservative and Republican House for approximately 7 or 8 hours. A very tall and elegant woman, really quite charming and extraordinarily smart. But in any case, in a press release announcing her resignation or her intent to step down, she said something that really captured me and mirrors some of my own beliefs. And what she said was, 12 years ago, I joined Planned Parenthood to fight for a world where every woman can live her best life. And I think that's really the essence of what Planned Parenthood and family planning is really about. It's about the time in this historical evolution of women's ability to have a life of her own choosing, and that choosing coming about very likely because she has decisions and choices that she may make now with respect to her reproductive capacity. Tonight I'll focus on just a couple of things. One is the fight that Planned Parenthood is constantly in because it's being challenged by the right. And second really is, I think, more important and is included in the material in your handout. But I want you to really understand and see what it is that Planned Parenthood actually does, not what the right wing tells you that it does. So right now, I'm going to focus on reminding you one of the worst, I think, acts of destructive, intentional destruction that was aimed at Planned Parenthood. And that occurred just recently, as I said. And that was the worldwide dissemination of what I would like to call the Planned Parenthood sells aborted baby parts for profit videos that began showing online and then were repeated by television and other media outlets. And it began in July of 2014. Now, you most likely saw one of those first videos, and it was seemingly the most shocking one of the broadcasts. It was sent out again over the internet and picked up by radio, television, often commented and written about. I'm going to tell you just a little bit about those videos, and if you have any question about it, I know quite a bit about it, and I can't tell you, I don't have enough time to go into it in too much depth, but if you have some questions, please hold them at the end, and I'll be happy to address them in the question and answer period. But just to remind you about one of the first videos that came on, and I'm certain that most of you have seen some of these, but I'll read you just a description from Vox, which is an online media outlet. And this was published on August the 13th of 2015 and sort of describes that first video. And I'm quoting here. The first Planned Parenthood sting video opens with a jarring scene. There's a woman, she's eating lunch at a very upscale restaurant, and behind her there's this lovely afternoon sunshine that's streaming through the windows. And this woman is picking through her salad with a fork, which she occasionally uses to emphasize a point. She has a glass of red wine in front of her, and she's talking in what appears to be an animated and almost energetic and excited way about fetal organs that her abortion clinics can procure for scientific researchers. Again, remember, she's talking about aborted fetal organ tissue, a disturbing subject, in my view, in any case, under any circumstances. Well, here's what she says on the video. I think you'll remember this. A lot of people want intact hearts these days, always as many intact livers as possible. Some people want lower extremities too, and that's simple. That's easy. I don't know what they're doing with the stuff. Unquote. Vox then continues, and I quote, "The woman in the video is Deborah Nucatola. She is the Planned Parenthood's medical director. She thinks that she's talking to the operators of a biologics firm that provides fetal tissue to researchers, but she isn't. She's talking to actors from an anti-abortion group called the Center for Medical Progress, which over the past 3 years has secretly taped meetings with her and at least 3 other Planned Parenthood officials and other providers of abortion services. This summer," the article continues, "the Center for Medical Progress has released 5 10-minute segments that purport to show that Planned Parenthood profits from the procuring of fetal tissue for researchers. They are full of moments like the one that I've just described, conversations about fetal tissues and organs that feel, quite frankly, utterly grisly, shocking against the backdrop, if you will, of wine and a light salad." Planned Parenthood has charged that those Center for Medical Progress tapes, they are clips. They have been heavily edited, and they were created by activists who have been widely discredited by independent agencies. And then the Vox reporter continues that I've covered Planned Parenthood scandal for months now, and it's only become larger. The videos kicked off a firestorm not only in Congress, but it's just about to bring down the government. So if you'll remember that video and how destructive it was, that was an attempt to destroy Planned Parenthood socially, politically, and certainly economic. And remember that out of 12 hours of this secretly recorded tape, 50 minutes were selected out. The primary allegations in those videos, as I've just explained, is that Planned Parenthood's primary occupation, its whole reason for being, is this very grisly business of mass harvesting and then criminally trafficking in the sale of aborted fetal organs. They call them baby parts for the purposes of raking in a huge profit. I'm not making this up. This is what the right has always said. But not only did the filmmaker David Daleiden and his group edit the recordings actually made of Planned Parenthood officers, but they did something else. They took images, stolen images, from circumstances that had absolutely nothing to do with Planned Parenthood. They took images off of other videos and off of other sources and simply cut them up and dropped them into their videos to assert or to show proof of the alleged gruesome, barbaric nature of Planned Parenthood's work. Let me just share with you two other illustrations about how they were capturing and how they were exploiting something that was false about what Planned Parenthood's real business was. And this is about cutting out other person's work and editing them into the Planned Parenthood videos. And this came from CNN in October of 2015, and it's Dateline Costa Mesa. And it says David Daleiden, and he's the man that made those surreptitiously filmed videos, he wanted to show exactly what a 19-week-old aborted fetus being held in the hands of a Planned Parenthood medical technician looks like. The problem was that he didn't have such a picture. So he went on the internet, he found something close to that and inserted it into his own video, into his own documentary. The photograph, which shows two cupped hands holding a tiny male fetus, appeared on screen as dramatic music was inset into the background of the video. And against this background and backdrop, there's a medical technician's voice that comes in and very sadly says and details that she was present when the intact 19-week fetus was aborted at a Planned Parenthood clinic, and then she asserts that it was aborted in that clinic for the purposes of harvesting the tissue. And again, I'm still reading from CNN's work. It said, Daleiden's video failed to mention that the photo and the story did not match at all. The problem was that the photo was not, in fact, even an aborted fetus at a Planned Parenthood clinic. It was a stillborn child of Alexis Fretz, who actually had wanted that child and was deeply disturbed that she had lost it. It was her stillborn son, and he was born in 2013. It was a miscarriage and not an abortion. And she was so upset that she posted on her own internet posting a photo of this child in her husband's hands, I take it, to memorialize that child that she had named Walter. So this was a very sacred image to her. Then, without Fretz's knowledge or without her consent, Mr. Daleiden and his two-man documentary group plucked out that photo from the webpage and they dropped it into their anti-Planned Parenthood documentary and asserted that this was something that occurred at Planned Parenthood. And then when he was finally cornered, David Daleiden finally admitted that he in fact had cut and pasted this image into that video. And there's a second event that you may remember that has to do with those earlier videos. This was also reported on CNN. And the headline here is that misleading video cited during the Republican presidential debate. And here's the article, or bits of it. And I quote, David Daleiden also is being criticized for a second potentially misleading use of video that has found its way into the Republican presidential campaign. And if you were watching the Republican presidential campaign, you may have remembered this. GOP candidate Carly Fiorina cited a portion of the Center for Medical Progress videos in which an intact fetus kicks its little left leg and moves its arm shortly after being aborted. Fiorina described the video during CNN's Republican debate that was televised from Ronald Reagan Presidential Library on September 16th, and she used that horrific image that she recalled so vividly in order to support her call to end all federal funding of Planned Parenthood. But in an interview about a month later, David DeLayden admits that he has no information whatsoever about where that piece of videotape came from, but it was bought by from another anti-abortion group and cut and pasted into that video and represented to be an abortion performed at Planned Parenthood. Well, I just wanted you to remember some of those horrific. These are the weapons which I'm going to continue to emphasize to you. These are the kinds of acts and weapons that the conservative right continuously attempt to employ against Planned Parenthood. And now I want to talk to you just about a couple much more recent events that show other actions that people take to try to destroy Planned Parenthood. And this happened just on February the 14th of 2018, so just about 3 weeks ago. And it occurred in East Orange, New Jersey, where a man who's 31 years old and a resident of Massachusetts, but he was visiting family for a while in East Orange, New Jersey. There was a large-sized bakery delivery truck that the delivery man left running. He jumped into that truck and gunned the engine, drove down the street, and drove right into the glass front of the Planned Parenthood of East Orange, New Jersey's medical health clinic. He injured 3 women in that crash. 2 of them were patients in the waiting room. One a pregnant woman, the other was a staff woman. He was not himself injured, of course, in this crash, but he was arrested and he has been charged under New Jersey law with a number of felonies. But at a hearing a couple of weeks later, a hearing before a court in New Jersey to determine whether or not he should be released from being held in jail, there was an appearance there by the state prosecutor, and that state prosecutor argued that he should not be released for 3 different reasons. One, that he thought and told the court that this man, whose name was Marcus Alcius, was extremely dangerous, that the suspect himself had told the investigating police officers after his arrest that his crash was in fact intentional, and that he proclaimed that he was willing to die in his attempt to cause injury and perhaps death and damage. And then the prosecutor told the court during that same hearing that following his arrest, Mr. Alcius said, "I wanted to do it, I wanted to do it. It was personal and I didn't care what happened after that." And it's interesting that he took this action towards Planned Parenthood when the officers were able to take his electronics. They looked through them and found that over a year's period of time, he had been researching over and over again locations of Planned Parenthood on the East Coast. There's the second event that I wanted to bring to your attention. This one happens just February 19th, so not too long ago, a couple of weeks ago, in Boise, Idaho, in the Capitol building. And every year throughout the United States, the Planned Parenthood affiliates in the area have a lobby day, and many organizations have lobby days in their state capital, and this was the one for Planned Parenthood of Idaho. And so maybe 200, I saw their picture out in front of the Capitol. I didn't count them, but it looked like about 200 people had come from all over the state, and they came to talk to their legislators about two particular pieces of pending legislation. And among those people coming to talk to their legislator, there were 12 students who had come from the University of Idaho at Moscow, Idaho. That's 300 miles away from Boise. They drove 7 hours, 300 miles, and got there in the morning because they had an appointment at 9 o'clock with their very own senator who represents the area, Lata County, where Moscow and the University of Idaho is located. And they went there, as everyone did, again, just to talk to their legislators. Now, they had made appointments well in advance. The appointments were made by the legislator's office and confirmed. And they were to talk about two things, and the legislators know what they're to talk about. And the two things that they were going to want to talk to the legislators about, the two pieces of pending litigation, one was a change in the Idaho law that would allow women to get a prescription for their birth control for a year's period in advance as opposed to just 1 month at a time. This is important in a rural area, and sometimes rural areas don't have a lot of pharmacies, and this is very helpful, and it helps people who want to plan ahead. So that was one of the things they were going to advocate for. It's a bill that's pending. And the second one was a bill that's pending that will bring their sex education, their school sex education curricula up to date because it hadn't been updated since 1970. It's a one-page bill, and it looks nothing like the things that we have in California that talk about many different lifestyles and choices and sexual health and all sorts of things. This one just mandated that it be brought up to date. And it still gave the districts an option not to have sex education in their school district, and it also gave the parents the right to have their child not attend. So these kids from Idaho, 300 miles, 7 hours, driving to get there at 9 o'clock, and they have their first appointment with Senator Dan Foreman. And again, he's from their very area. And when they get there, they're told that the meeting has been canceled. Now, they had some other meetings, and so they went ahead and they decided then they would write him a little note, and they left him a little note. It actually was done on a poster-sized board, and left him a note. And I understand they left him a little package of condoms as well, because these are, after all, college students. So later on, however, they had gone to their other appointments, and as they're returning and walking through the halls, I mean, they're in the Capitol, and this is a big day. I go to Planned Parenthoods in Sacramento every year. It's a lot of fun, and it's kind of uplifting. So in any case, they're out there, and they sort of cross paths with Senator Foreman in the hallway. And here's how that meeting was described by the Huffington Post. The students, and I'm quoting here, the students later saw Foreman in the hallway triggering a stormy exchange. The tense exchange between Foreman and about a dozen University of Idaho students was captured on camera. The videos circulating on social media show Senator Foreman, forcefully pointing his finger and belligerently saying to the students, "Abortion is murder. I stand against it." The students then said that they hadn't come there to talk about abortion. But Foreman continued, saying, and again raising his finger in a very aggressive manner, that's what Huffington Post says, and you can see it, actually, this video is online, and shouting again at the students, "I'm a Roman Catholic and a conservative Republican, and I think what you guys are doing really stinks." Now, this is their legislator that they drove 7 hours and 300 miles to talk about updating the 1970 sex education. But they had their pink Planned Parenthood T-shirts on, and I guess that's enough. When the students told him that they hadn't come, when he said that he thought what they were doing really stinks, one of the students in the background, you could hear him say this, is, "Well, sir, that's your choice." And he then, and you can see this, it's just quite shocking, really. He whirls around and he turns back and he sort of aggressively comes back towards them again and says, "You're damn right it's my choice, so stay out of my office. Next time you walk in my office, you'll be dealing with the Idaho State Police." Let's hope so. Well, that's not as violent as crashing the bread truck through the window, but that's a kind of a violence to our young people that just is unacceptable. And it's a violence towards them because they were wearing their shirts. I put in your handout a picture of that group. You can see how threatening they are. It's on the second page. They just look like sweet kids, but they are wearing their Planned Parenthood T-shirts. And you can see, and I've given you a copy of the note there, there's nothing to suggest at all that they did anything appropriate. And that sort of violence, it seems to me, is just completely uncalled for. But violence against Planned Parenthood is really not new. But the violence did increase. Remember that Roe versus Wade was decided in 1973, and that is, of course, the United States Supreme Court decision that said that women and men have privacy rights, and those privacy rights extend to your decision as to whether to have a child, and if you're a woman, to carry a pregnancy to term or to terminate it before fetal viability. So I would ask you just to turn to page 3, because here I put in a little chart for you that shows you some of the violence or the numbers and kinds of violence that was perpetrated against Planned Parenthood and other clinics from 1975 to 2015. And it just is shocking to me. And you can see here the number of murders, 11. And then there were the 3, if you will remember, just in November of 2015 in Colorado Springs, Colorado, when there was that vicious assault on that clinic, and 3 more people were killed. Attempted murders, now a total of 35. Bombings and arson. That's 276 really violent acts toward Planned Parenthood for the work that it does. And you'll remember, too, that among those that were murdered were 4 physicians. And you'll probably remember, I love this room because most of you remember the same things I remember. It doesn't happen very much anymore in our lives. As you can't ever talk about the day Kennedy was killed. No, the kids don't know what you're talking about. But you'll remember Dr. George Tiller, who was gunned down in the Lutheran Church, where he was with his family and had gone for all of his lifetime. He was a well-known and very skilled OBGYN. And the reason he was targeted is because he did late-term abortions. Now, the term late-term abortion is generally an abortion that happens after 20 weeks. That little fetus is beginning to look more and more like the Gerber baby, and we all are deeply moved by that. But the late-term abortions are about 1% of the abortions that happen in the United States, and they happen late generally because there are 2 things that are not discovered until late, and one is a severe deformity or deficiency in the child itself, or that something in that pregnancy has created danger to the mother that's a real danger to her life or to her continuing health. But because he did those, for those reasons, he was gunned down in cold blood. So, there's a lot of violence to go around. There's some other information in here. I've also listed there another sort of attack, a manner of attack on Planned Parenthood, and that is trap laws, targeted regulations of abortion providers. I don't really have time to go through that with you tonight, but you can look some of those up. But these are the kinds of laws, and over the last 2 or 3 years, there have been some 200 or 300 state laws passed in the conservative states in the United States that make it virtually impossible for poor women to ever have access to women's reproductive health care centers and abortion services by doing such things as requiring that the clinic have a complete surgical center that meets all of the requirements of a hospital brain surgery center, when in fact about 80% of, well, excuse me, it's not, about 60% of the early term abortions now are done with medications. It has nothing to do with the surgery. There's no cutting. You could do it on a sofa, okay? It's the prescription of two kinds of medication. So it isn't necessary. The pitch is made that it's necessary and it's in the woman's best interest, except it's just a fiction. But the reason that that's so effective is because it cost about $1 million to build a facility and to put all of the kinds of equipment and medications in there that are required to have a surgical center. And so it becomes really infeasible. And that puts facilities out of business. So there are a number of those, including that physicians have to have admitting privileges at a hospital within 30 miles of the center. And that's because physicians who do abortions don't get admitting privileges to the hospitals. And why is that? Getting privilege into a hospital, for a physician to have admitting privileges in the hospital, isn't a certification of that physician's ability. It's a reward for bringing in patients, all right? It's a business kind of transaction. I don't belittle that. But hospitals allow privileges for people who bring in patients. Physicians who do abortions very seldom ever have a patient go to a hospital on an emergency basis, so it's just not necessary. In any case, that's another one of the tools that's used to try to attack Planned Parenthood. Planned Parenthood has just been a lightning rod, and is one of the most, and abortion, as you well know, is one of the most defining issues of our time for some reason. More important, I suppose, than whether or not the Russians have interfered with our elections. But let's look now at page 4, because I want to now give you an idea and actually some documentation here about what Planned Parenthood really does. What it really does. Now, this information, you can look it up. The annual reports for Planned Parenthood over the last 5 or 6 years are posted online for the Planned Parenthood affiliates of America, which includes all 57 of the state affiliates. And they gather all of the information. There's information online from our own local Planned Parenthood. But let's just go through this. So in 2015 and 2016, as I've indicated up here, the total number of services presented comes to almost 9.5 million. These are the services that were rendered. And these are documented. People might say, well, Planned Parenthood, they're liars, they'll say anything, and so they'll make these numbers up. But these are medical services delivered, and a great majority of them are reimbursed out of insurance or out of federally financed and state-financed programs to aid the poor. And so all of these are documented because they get compensated for them. So numbers of STI, that's sexually transmitted infections, testing, and treatment, is 45% of Planned Parenthood's services rendered in 2015 and 16. You can see the number there, 4.266 million of those. Contraceptive services, 30% of what it did, 2.8 million and more. Services rendered with respect to contraceptives. Cancer screenings and prevention, breast exams, pap smears, 7% of its services rendered. Other women's services there is a catch-all, but you can read them. It's documented there. Other services down at the bottom, and they're listed there, 1%, and abortions, 3%. Now, I bring that to your attention. This is what Planned Parenthood said it does. I think it's true. You can look at it yourself. But then look below. This is a picture of a screen that was on Fox News. Now, I don't know exactly when this was, because I got it later. But this is a presentation by the conservative right groups and anti-abortion groups that want to discredit Planned Parenthood. And you can see what they have done. They created here a graphic that says services 2015-16 that uses the Planned Parenthood logo over on the left-hand side. It has Planned Parenthood's ULR address there down at the very bottom. And then it looks like it's listing all of their services. And what do they say? Abortion procedures. Now this was from 2015 and 16. 328,000, blah, blah, blah. And you look up here on your list that I just gave you, and oops, says abortion services. So they got that one right. So they listed that one. And then it says prenatal services, and it lists a number, and miscarriage care and adoption referrals. They've listed all of those. And you might think, if you saw that as a presentation of Planned Parenthood services in 2015 and 16, as it says, that that's what Planned Parenthood did. But what they did was cherry-picked a few services, put the numbers down, to draw and create a different picture than the reality. The total number of services there, if you add all of those up in that Fox News screens there, is 342,000 services, when Planned Parenthood did 9.5 million services. Now, when people see that, they have a misimpression. Those numbers are correct, but they're pulled out and reorganized in a way that creates a false picture. And when you do the calculations on that, it would make you think that the services, as far as Fox News and this graphic is concerned, that the abortion services are the largest part of what Planned Parenthood does, and it turns out that that's 95.8% of the services on this graphic. Wow! That's what Planned Parenthood must be all about. Now, interestingly enough, that graphic and the information that seems to be departed on there, I'm just not making this up, because previously a similar graphic like that had been created and circulated by anti-abortion groups. And in July of 2015, on Fox News, and this was posted, there is an article written by, former Arkansas Governor Mike Huckabee. And he had already declared his candidacy for the Republican nomination. And so here's what he wrote, and this is just a week after that first video came out. And what he said is, and I quote, "Each year, Planned Parenthood performs more than 300,000 abortions, and 94% of the pregnant women who walk into Planned Parenthood receive an abortion." So he has taken that information and presented it and asserted it in a way that is not the same as the actual facts. But that wasn't enough, he went on. And he said that since 1973, abortion has ended the lives of 60 million babies, and we will never know how many of these souls, that sort of religious reference, I think, but anyway, I'm editorializing, how many of these souls were harvested to the highest bidder. And he's really on a roll now, so he adds something else. "It should enrage every American that our government confiscates money from our paychecks only to bankroll these barbaric butchers with $500 million each year." And he says Planned Parenthood isn't a health care provider. And when he says that, I just want you to think back to the 9.5 million services that are healthcare provisions. That wasn't enough. PolitiFact actually put that through the machine and said, false. Anyway. And then a few weeks later, Representative Marsha Blackburn, she's a Republican from Tennessee and headed up one of the committees that had an investigation that was televised about Planned Parenthood. And she was on that program, and here's what she said. 94% of their business, Planned Parenthood's business, 94% is abortion services. That's by their own numbers, she said. 327,600 abortions, she said. Taking that number, again, off of that kind of graphic. That wasn't enough. Also, on the floor of the United States House of Representatives in July 2015, Bill Johnson, a Republican from Ohio, said, Mr. Speaker. You know how they say that? Anyway. Many of us have seen it, a recently surfaced horrifying video that provides evidence that Planned Parenthood employees participated in the harvesting of baby body parts. Mr. Speaker, I rise today in absolute disgust. Not only is Planned Parenthood profiting from abortions, but this video shows a top Planned Parenthood executive discussing how best to procure and to sell specific organs from these defenseless aborted babies' bodies. As a father and a grandfather, I find these acts unconscionable and barbaric. Well, I would too if it were true. But anyway, I'm sorry. And then he continues, Mr. Speaker. I love saying that. I cannot fathom why taxpayers' hard-earned dollars are provided to organizations that actively allow such gruesome practices to occur. He said in 2013, are you ready for this? Abortions made up 94% of Planned Parenthood's so-called pregnancy services, 94%. Yet taxpayers' funding accounts for 41% of their overall revenues. So we have here Governor Huckabee and Representative Johnson tying together these gruesome films, videos, and tying that to the fact that Planned Parenthood does have revenues from governmental agencies, and he's saying, and they're both suggesting that those revenues are paying for the 94% of what Planned Parenthood does. So now I have put together some information for you, again, in your handout. And if you would go then to page 5, I'm going to, page 5 is not the page. But I gave you page 5. I won't have time to go over it, but you may be interested. These are the services that are done by Planned Parenthood of Orange and San Bernardino counties, our own. And I thought you might be interested to know what it is we do and how many people that we serve. And so you can look at that. And it's something I think we can be extraordinarily proud of. This is an extraordinary area to live in for our Planned Parenthood service. If you'll turn to page 6, because here I've shown you what Planned Parenthood's services are. And now here I'm going to show you about the revenues and expenses of Planned Parenthood for that same period that I just shared with you, 2015, 2016. And this is, again, nationally. So I point out to you, if you have your pens, I made a mistake here, and I'd like to correct it because it was unintentional. But in any case, looking at the left-hand column, where it says affiliate revenue. This is the amount of money received by Planned Parenthood from various sources in 2015, 2016. And the first entry there says government health services, reimbursement, and grants. The mistake I made was the percent of the revenue there. I said 41, and actually I made an arithmetic mistake, and I'm sorry. It's actually 49%. But the money, the amount of money that was received in that year from federal funds and state funds was $454.6 million. Wow! Yikes! That's $500 million. Was that a gift? No. This is reimbursement to Planned Parenthood for services rendered. It, like all other healthcare providers, has to be qualified and be a qualified provider and provide services like any other service. And the rates for the services that they perform are fixed. Everybody gets the same rate. They don't get paid for everything they do. They only get paid for the things that the government program will reimburse. These are reimbursements to Planned Parenthood for services rendered, that 9.5 million services. So that's where a large portion of the government money goes to. Does that go to create a market in baby parts? No, it has nothing to do with that. It's all those other services. Interesting, if you look at the next entry, there too I made a mistake. It's 29%, not 33%. But $306.8 million was donated to Planned Parenthood by private contributions and bequests. And you can see then non-government health services revenue, that could be any sort of insurance or payment by a third party. So that's the revenue that Planned Parenthood gets. Now go to the next entry there where it shows affiliate expenses. And here, I got my math right on this one, so you don't have to correct it. But here, the amount of the cost to Planned Parenthood of the medical services, that 9.5 million services that were provided, was $798.8 million. That exceeds the amount received from the government by $244 million. It's because of the private gifts, the donations that we all make to Planned Parenthood, that they can deliver all of the services that they do deliver. So I just wanted to give you, and I hope you have now, a picture of what Planned Parenthood actually does, what its revenues are, where they come from. And let me then just tell you this, with respect to abortion. Planned Parenthood doesn't get one dime from the federal government for any abortion services. No abortion provider in the United States gets reimbursed by federal or state dollars for abortions unless it's the case where the mother's life or health is in serious danger and it's a therapeutic and mandated process. So not one dime. And that's because the Hyde Amendment was passed in 1978 and has been renewed every year since, that no federal money can be paid to reimburse an abortion. In California, we are a different people, we're a different group, and California will reimburse for abortion services. But that comes out of a different pot, and it's because it's state money. So that tells you income, expenses, and what Planned Parenthood does. I can't go too far because we're running low on time, but I want to share with you something that most people don't know, and it's in this right-hand column now on page 6. And it's some information about when abortions, at what stage in a gestation do the abortions occur in the United States. And as you can see, 66% of the abortions that occur in the United States occur when the fetus is less than 8 weeks. And I had some, let me see here. Yes, at 8 weeks, now every abortion, in my view, is a sadness. I mean, there is a potential life there. There's something sacred about it, but there are other things in the mix. So I don't diminish anything when I tell you this. But I just think it's important to kind of keep things in context. That for those abortions that occur, that 66% of all of them that occur before 6 weeks, just to give yourself a picture, the fetus at that size is 0.6 of an inch, a half an inch, and weighs 0.04 ounces. 4/100ths of an ounce. It's still a sadness. This is, not, well, think about it however you will. I don't want to editorialize that, but I think it's kind of important. This is not the Gerber baby waving from the you know, how they like to show, anyway. And so you can look here, in presently, viability is not a medical term, it is sort of a legal term, and it really is kind of a guess. But when you're talking about a pregnancy, viability is considered to be the period of time that if that fetus then were removed, it could survive, either on its own, but generally if they're very small they can't, but with the aid of whatever medical technology we have available. So that's the period of viability. And under Roe versus Wade, under then the later cases, which are Planned Parenthood versus Casey in 1996, states may not interfere with a woman's right to choose abortion before viability, although they do, but they're not supposed to. But viability is the point here. So most of these abortions occur before viability, and they're all, therefore, sad as they are, legal. And you'll see here, the smallest little sliver on this graph shows that after 21 weeks, 1.3% of the abortions occur after 21 weeks. Those are, again, those very, very sad and very rare cases where the fetus is likely already severely damaged or the woman's life is at risk. I put in just a little notice here because I didn't know this, but the earliest surviving premature birth fetus happened, in fact, in 1987 in Ottawa, Canada, a little baby boy at 21 weeks and 5 days. But before that period, it's very unlikely that any fetus would survive. That's it. One last page, and this last page, if you'll turn with me to page 7, because I think this is really the most touching and important part of what it is I want to share with you tonight. Because I want you to understand that the services that Planned Parenthood renders and the services that abortion providers render, for the most part, are rendered for the poorest among us. There isn't anyone in the middle class in the United States of America, or there aren't many, and most of us, if we were younger and in this circumstance, that we couldn't get help from any number of services. It's those who are poor that have to rely upon public interest and nonprofit entities like Planned Parenthood for their basic health care, for their reproductive health care, and for abortion services. So we need to know what we're talking about when we're talking about Planned Parenthood's patients. About 80, and in some areas 90%, Planned Parenthood's patients are low income, very low income. And what is low income in the United States? So let me start with the first chart up there at the top. Poverty in the United States is defined by your income and a marker called the federal poverty line, and these are the threshold amounts. So you're eligible for certain benefits for those who are low income in the United States. If you're a family of one and your income is $12,000 or less, you're living at or below the poverty line. And you look at a family of four, $24,000 a year. That's pretty poor, and you try to think about what that would be to live. And look at a family of 9 on $45,000 a year and think about what that means. So I did some calculations and looked up a little bit more information because this is really what this is about. What kind of country are we? We can all get reproductive health care. We have access to birth control, and we have access to abortion services if we need them or want them, because we can afford it, or the people around us are, or we can get help. But there are some people who cannot get help, except through agencies like Planned Parenthood and others. But the population of the United States in May of 2017, I've calculated out, or put it out there for you. I didn't calculate that. The federal government did that. But 1 in 5 children in the United States, that's 20% of them, live below the poverty line. What kind of a nation are we when we have 1 in 5 children living below the poverty line? Another entry, we have 47 million people who live in poverty in the United States. And to me, that's really a very sad circumstance. Poverty by gender or by sex, 12% of the poor are men, 15% are women. Women are more likely, although not greatly, but more likely to be impoverished. And then we have another whole set of people in the United States that live in deep poverty. That's living at 50% below, at 50% of this federal poverty guideline. And it's unimaginable. So any health issues that they have are completely crippling in every way. And I put another figure up here on the right-hand side, how much it costs to raise, an estimate of what it costs to raise a child from birth to age 17. And I understand it's about $250,000. And if a woman works at the poverty line, at poverty wages, it takes her 17 years, approximately 16 years, to make that much money if every penny she went in was just to raise that child. I'm trying to draw a picture for you of who Planned Parenthood serves and why it's really important and how it defines who we are as Americans and as human beings and as compassionate progressives that we are. And then it gets more shocking. Let's look at poverty and ethnicity and race. So the percentage of people in the United States living at the poverty line and below the poverty line, if you're African American, black, is 24%. And Hispanics, and I've listed it there, 21.4%, and whites, 11.4%. So we see that people of color are disproportionately poor. I suggest to you respectfully that that's built into our economic system and has been since the very early and beginnings of our nation. But finally, because some of us are women, and I'm always interested in our women, and we've always been concerned, we women have always been concerned about women because we were one of them and we wanted to get as much pay as we thought we were deserving of. And we all know that women, even today, on average, make about 79 cents for every $1 that men make on average. So that's women, all races. When you look at Asian women, their income rate is 85% as opposed to the average of all men. And white women, 75. See, and I was always thinking we were getting 79, but we're not. We're getting 75. I don't know why, but anyway, I looked at it. But here's the real disgrace, and I think the real pain and the real challenge to all of us. Look at what African American women get on an hourly basis compared to average male salaries, 63 cents. And then look at Hispanic women, 54 cents for every dollar. And in California and in Southern California and here in Orange County, we have a lot of Hispanics. We see them, I see them every day. They work in hotels, they work in restaurants. These are the most vulnerable people in their jobs. They're very vulnerable with respect to the amount of the income. How are they ever going to make it? And if we allow Planned Parenthood to be destroyed, then I so fear for the people that we should most care about, these women will have no place to go. So I really join with Cecile Richards, and I join Planned Parenthood, and I work every day, and I hope you will join me to build a world where every woman can choose and live the best life that she chooses. I thank you so very much. I've spoken much too long.
I came from sort of ultra Roman Catholic family. And I grew up with the idea that the sanctity of life and life begins at conception. One of my family member, who is my niece, is a Roman Catholic Benedictine nun, so you know where I'm coming from. And I still cannot shake the idea that we are tampering with God's natural law. And I'd like you to make a comment on it.
I'm happy to, sir. And first, let me tell you. Look, I'll answer personally. I sit on the board of Planned Parenthood. I didn't come here tonight to speak for that Planned Parenthood. I just support it because I believe in it. My view is this, and I think it might be a view shared by Planned Parenthood and by probably most of the people who believe in choice. Because I think the issue is that who is to decide. Now, and what does the person who's going to decide, what do they use as their guidance or their point of reference? And so we know there are many belief systems, and when you have one, it's the right one, but somebody next to you may have a different one, and that's right for them. And so I think you go to the source to make your decision, and if you're wrong about it, you may have to pay in the next life. But here the issue is choice. And the issue is that if there is an unintended pregnancy, someone has to decide whether that pregnancy should be carried all the way to term, because there are consequences, not only to the woman, not only to that child, but to that woman's other children, to that woman's other family members. There's lots to be decided. The question is who will make that decision to carry that pregnancy to term or to terminate it for good reasons. I deeply respect your religious beliefs, but your family would follow those, and that's perfect for you. It may not be someone else's choice, but I thank you for the question.
After the videotapes, there started to be legislation and executive decisions to, quote, defund Planned Parenthood.
I'm glad you asked.
And my understanding was that, in fact, they were simply getting reimbursements for medical services. And the cases, and Planned Parenthood was, if I'm not mistaken, was winning all the cases because they depended upon justification for not reimbursing one qualified provider as opposed to others. I then kind of stopped following the cases, or as Donald Trump would say, I got tired of winning. So what's been happening? Has Planned Parenthood been losing any of these cases? And sidebar question, does Planned Parenthood get any significant grants from government other than for provision of specific qualified medical services?
The answer to the last question is yes. I don't know exactly what those grants are. Planned Parenthood gets money from two primary federal funds under two federal programs, Medicaid being one, which is medical services for those who economically qualify, and the other is family planning services, different programs, and that's focused on contraceptives, birth control, sexually transmitted, those kinds of issues, again, that people qualify by virtue of their level of income. So those are two things you ask about grants. Planned Parenthood operates medical clinics, and governments, state governments and federal governments occasionally make money available and gives grants, sometimes to buy a piece of equipment, a piece of medical equipment that's expensive but necessary and allows small clinics and whatever, to be able to serve the population around it that they couldn't do if they didn't have that. So they can qualify to get those kinds of grants to buy that piece of equipment. So they do occasionally get that kind of grant. It's very specific for a very specific. Let me go back, and there's so much to talk about the fallout from those videos. It was really horrible, and I had been on Planned Parenthood's board for about 6 months when that video came out, and I thought, oh my God, I sit on a board that does this. I mean, when they first came out, you thought, oh, good golly, could they really be doing that? And I was really quite heartsick, and I think everybody felt the same way. The interesting thing was, this has become so politicized. Abortion has been so politicized. It's one of those emotional issues, and it can be one of those things that you can create a whole sort of politics of hate around people that would kill babies. I mean, who wouldn't? And so it's a very powerful thing. So within a matter of days, this 15 governors in those many conservative states, you can look it up, and I have the names of them, it won't matter to you, it'll just say conservative states, immediately issued orders or sent requirements to their agencies to stop funding Planned Parenthood because they could cut off their portion of family planning monies and Medicaid monies. Both those programs are programs where the federal government provides usually 75 to 90% of the amount of the money that goes into a program, but the states, if they want that money, they have to contribute a portion to it too. So they have control of some portion of that. So 15 of those states immediately stopped Planned Parenthood from becoming a provider. And another, but sometimes overlapping 15 states, 15 attorneys general opened up criminal investigations into Planned Parenthood. And the basis of that is that we can well imagine this. It's to really be a gruesome business if we had poor women producing fetuses in order for us to abort them, to take that tissue and make that a business. And it's illegal, you'll be happy to know. You can't sell organs here. There are lots of things that are regulated for very good reasons. So you cannot sell fetal tissue. And if you do, it's a violation of a criminal federal law. And so what the allegations here were that Planned Parenthood, when it did these abortions, 94% of its business, but when it did all of these abortions, that it gathered this material up and it sold it for a profit. That same statute will allow the recipient, the initial collector of that tissue, a small fee because there's a certain amount of fee to getting that tissue. It's going to be used for scientific research. That's the only thing it can be used for. It has to be immediately protected, temperature regulated, it has to be in a sterile environment. There are all sorts of things you have to do immediately, and there's some cost to having to do that. So you can get reimbursed the cost for handling those samples. Interestingly enough, in these videos, they were trying to get Planned Parenthood people to break that law, or to say, or to admit that they break that law. They were offering them, we'll give you $1,600 for a heart. I mean, all of this is so disturbing, but offering huge amounts of money for this tissue that Planned Parenthood was providing. I'm going off a little bit, but it reminds me of something else. You would think that there are approximately 650 medical clinics that are operated by Planned Parenthood throughout the United States. So you think, oh gosh, they're all doing 94% of every woman that goes in there is going to have an abortion, and they're going to collect all this stuff. First of all, out of the 650 clinics in the United States, only about half offer abortion services in the first place. Secondly, I lost my train of thought. Excuse me?
Only half offer abortion, so the other half.
Yeah. Well, anyway, I'll go back to your other questions about the litigation. I'll come back to this in a moment. The litigation, yes. When the state stopped the funding, then Planned Parenthood, and generally it has its own lawyers, but they'll get some specialized lawyers, and they'll file a lawsuit to enjoin that action, claiming that it violates their contract to be a licensed provider and but you have to go into all of those states and litigate them. And yes, they did generally win most of those cases. And in every single one of the cases where the attorneys general went in and did an investigation to find all of this illegal conduct that Planned Parenthood was doing, they found absolutely no wrongdoing, and they were the kind of red state people that wanted to find evil, and they didn't find any and had to admit it. So that's another thing. I remembered what I was wanting to say about the tissue thing, because as it turns out, there are 57, doesn't matter except it's kind of interesting, 57 affiliate organizations in Planned Parenthood in the United States. California has 7 affiliates right here. But of all those 57 affiliates, only 6 in the United States even had tissue donation programs. So here's how that works. If a woman decides she's going to have an abortion, she has it at a Planned Parenthood facility, she was given the option, and this is an option under the law, and you have to have informed consent, you have to have everything in writing, but the woman could decide to donate that tissue for research or not, and that's her decision. Planned Parenthood doesn't care one way or the other. They make no money off of this. It's a program that's offered. So only 6 affiliates out of the United States that has 57 affiliates even offered it. As it turned out, only 2 states in the United States had affiliates that had tissue programs. So the videos that gave you the impression that all of this was happening everywhere and in every state, those 15 states where they cut off the money to Planned Parenthood because they were selling fetal tissue and were having the attorneys general investigate because they were selling fetal, none of them were even involved in that. They didn't even have a program. So that's the kind of power that lies can create. And so, anyway, most of the things are under litigation. Planned Parenthood has won most of them, haven't won all of them, and we'll see how it turns out. Yes, I'm sorry.
I want to clarify something here. Looking at your report, 2015 to 16.
Yes.
As I understand, they saw about 2.5 million people. They did about $9.5 million procedures, 9.5 million procedures of one sort or another.
Yes.
It looks like out of that total, 328,000 approximately were actual abortions. Is that right?
Yes, sir. That's what's
Okay.
reported.
My question here is, many of these women, when they come in, as I understand, they're not automatically put into a room and then given an abortion. There's a procedure to go through, there's some counseling to go through. Do you have any figures at all on how many of the women that came in to get an abortion did not actually get an abortion and decided not to pursue that avenue?
No, sir, I do not have that information, but I can assure all of you this. Planned Parenthood is not in favor of abortion. Who here is in favor of abortion? No one is in favor of abortion. I think those of us who favor choice, that's what it's about. We favor the choice being made by the woman. So Planned Parenthood loses, even when it's reimbursed by the state of California. They get less than it actually costs. Most of them are not reimbursed. So it's not something that Planned Parenthood wants to do. When they have a person come in, she thinks she's pregnant, they give her a pregnancy test, they do an ultrasound, they have counseling, and tell her what all of her options are. And she really has to struggle and make that decision herself. I don't think they keep a record of what the outcome after the counseling is, whether they decide. But I expect that many women who have already know that they're pregnant and go to a Planned Parenthood facility have an idea that they've made, that they're thinking about an abortion because that's the safe, legal place to go if that's the decision that you've made. So it doesn't surprise me about that. And Planned Parenthood, none of us should be feeling ashamed. If Planned Parenthood has to do 15% of its services are abortions, that's because that's the need, not because Planned Parenthood wants to do them. And if, in fact, they close all Planned Parenthoods and all abortion providers, is that going to change abortion? No. The only thing that will change about abortion is they won't be safe anymore, and they won't be legal anymore. This is not what we want. This is what is, and trying to address it the best way we can. I'm sorry I don't have the information that you asked, but that's my best recollection.
How does the legislation treat rape and incest?
Well, almost all, these are matters of state law, but I do in fact believe that under Roe versus Wade, that there's an exception. All states have an exception for rape and incest, that you can get an abortion and that you're not going to be inhibited by that. Coming back to the men who had, I mean, I think that's just sort of an interesting thing, but almost all states. I mean, it would just be a shame to force a young person, an old person, any woman who has been forcibly impregnated to carry that child with her. Again, it's her choice. You know, the other interesting thing is that some states they give the rapist is the daddy, and they want to give him a voice. Isn't it just? I mean, he has a right to procreate. Anyway, so I think that's the most I can tell you, that in virtually every state, in fact, is reimbursable.
That's fantastic.
Thank you all.
You know what, I just have what I didn't understand about that video. If the sale of tissue is illegal in terms of selling and money, why, I mean, if they're saying I'll give you $1,500 for a heart, wouldn't the woman who's being asked about this know immediately that there's something's not right in this whole conversation?
I can't tell you. Maybe she had a second glass of wine. I can't.
And they did talk about the wine.
No, I know, because that made the narrative so good, didn't it? I mean,
Her glass of wine.
beautiful place, and she's picking through her salad, and she's having a glass of wine, and they're talking about
Theory
but,
and that, yeah.
But I really don't know how much
Okay.
is intended.
Well, I want to thank you so much. This was so powerful.